This happened to my auntie, on my mother's side of the family. She said that it happened over 15 years ago, but it's something she said that she regularly thinks about, especially on dark, rainy nights. She was drinking tea with my mother all those years ago. It was a rainy morning, and they were sitting in the kitchen, watching the rain lash the windows. There wasn't much conversation occurring, and the atmosphere in the house was quite gloomy. They were annoyed because they couldn't do their laundry. "It rained a lot last night too," my mum said something like that to her sister. Then, as if my aunt had awoken from some sort of dream, she replied, "Yeah, the rain! I just remembered something from last night." She looked worried. She said that she fell asleep in the living room and she woke up at about 1 a.m. She realized that she had to get to bed. She went upstairs and heard the sound of rain against the shutters. "It's really coming down out there," she thought. After washing her face and brushing her teeth, she got into bed and almost instantly fell asleep. She slipped into a dream. An old woman was pulling her hair in her dream. Her face was like dried leather, dark and cracked. She looked like a witch. My aunt screamed, "Stop it, it hurts!" She looked into those venomous eyes, and suddenly she opened her eyes, and she was awake. She thought she was awake, but there, right before her eyes, she saw the old woman from her dream. She screwed her eyes shut and threw her hands to cover them. And then when she opened her eyes, a second later, that horrible witch woman was gone. She was shaking in her bed, and she looked around the room. The shutters on the windows were wide open. Beyond the shutters, the windows were open too. Rain and wind were sweeping into her bedroom. The foot of her bed was wet with rain. She was certain that she had closed them, but there they were, wide open. She had no scaffolding outside her house, or any method she knew of that someone could climb to her window. She sat there in the dark, trying to rationalize what had happened, trying to convince herself that it was a dream and nothing more. But one thing she couldn't convince herself of was the fact that she knew the window and the shutters were closed before she went to sleep. When she told me this story, I saw on her face that this had troubled her for years. I asked her honestly if she truly believed that it was a dream. She looked at me and said, "I did at first, until I saw a clump of my hair in bed. I looked in the mirror, and I saw that I was missing some." This happened about half a year ago, when my friend called me up and asked for my help to move apartments. He said that in way of a thank you, he would treat me and a couple of other friends to sushi for dinner. Of course, since we were good friends, I said yes straight away. He was moving into a corner apartment on the first floor of a 2-story building. The kitchen was there straight away as you went in, and there was a toilet and a bath in separate rooms, and the living room and the bedroom were a nice size. That night after moving him in, us 4 drank alcohol, ate sushi, and slept on the floor. In the morning, me and the other 2 guys headed back home on the train. I remember one of them said, "Hey, did you see that shrine next to his building? Like, literally next to his apartment? I bet his dumb ass gets haunted." Yeah, I didn't forget those words. I saw my friend again for lunch, and I spoke to him about his new apartment. I asked how it was going. He said he was pleased with the location and the size of the place, and then he just trailed off. "What's the matter, man? Something weird going on there? Nosy neighbor. Hey, Don't tell me the place is haunted or I might never come back, I said. Well, yeah, something strange is actually happening. I keep finding long strands of hair all over the place. Ah, it's probably from all the babes you're bringing over, right? I joked. Yeah, I wish. No, it's probably from outside. You got it on your clothes or something. Hair is a weird thing. You never really notice when strands of it are in your house and they're not your own. Think about your own home right now. I bet there's some strands of hair in there that aren't yours. So I told him not to worry about it. So a few weeks go by without issue. And then one day we all notice that there seems to be something up with our friend. It's like he was overly tired all the time. We asked him what was going on, because it seemed kind of serious. He said he would talk about it off campus. We were at university, by the way. So that night, me and the two guys who helped him move in met up with him at a bar so he could tell us what was going on. We were all drinking again, and when the mood was right, one of us asked, "What's happening, man?" Guys, I don't know if you'll believe it. I can hardly believe it myself. You know I told you about the hair before, right? Finding these long strands of hair that didn't belong to me. Well, it got worse. You told me that the hair was probably coming from outside, right? Well, if that's the case, then the hair might be different sometimes, right? Different lengths? Well, the hair in my apartment is always the same length. At first, I would find them on the floor by the door. You know, usual places that one would find hair. But lately, this hair has been turning up in different areas, like everywhere. It's in the bedroom, it's in the sink, it's even in my cups. I'm worried, guys. I don't like being alone in my apartment anymore. I don't know what's happening. It's not my hair. I guess that me and my friends were kind of doubtful at first. Surely, if you look for similarities and, try and join up dots that aren't there, then you'll come to a conclusion like this, I said. Nah, man. Nah, that's not it. Seriously, there's something strange going on. He said it with such a serious look on his face. I had to take him seriously. Then one of my friends suggested that we all head over to his apartment to check it out. To my surprise, he replied, "Yeah, let's go. You'll quickly see what I mean." When we arrived at his apartment, we were lost for words. There was hair everywhere. In the sink, in the bath, in the toilet, in his room, all over the place. This was weird. Someone suggested that we should take a closer look at the hair to see if it was all the same length and the same color. I was freaked out yet excited. So there we all were, scrabbling around his new apartment, plucking up bunches of this phantom hair. We must have looked pretty odd. We picked up every strand of hair we could find, and we put them on some sheets of white paper on his table. We could quickly eliminate some of the strands of hair, as they looked short enough to belong to him. The rest, though, weren't his at all. When we put all those strands of hair together, it was as if a chill passed through the apartment. One of my friends said, "It's all the same. It must have come from one person." We were all silent in agreement. I've never seen a ghost and I've never had any kind of paranormal experience, so my mind didn't go in that direction at first. I saw how much this had affected my friend. He was practically trembling at the sight of all that long hair before him. Then he asked, "What should I do?" "Well, I don't think you're haunted, man. I mean, does that make you feel any better? Hair is physical, and it must have come from someplace. There has to be some sort of logical explanation for this," my friend said. Oddly, that seemed to calm our buddy down. I guessed he was more worried about spirits than people. It was pretty late, and we all had class the next day, so we were about to call it a night. One of my friends needed to use his bathroom before heading out, so he went in, and as soon as he entered, he came rushing out. His face was a ghastly shade of white. He didn't say a word, he just pointed. There, on the floor, were thick bunches of black, tangled hair. We hid out at an all-night restaurant. None of us wanted to be anywhere near that apartment. I will never forget the chills which raced up my spine when I saw that hair on the floor. Once we calmed down a little, we tried to make sense of what we had seen. There was no way 4 people looking for hair would have missed such big bunches of it on a white bathroom floor. No one else had entered the apartment but us, so there went the theory of it being brought in from outside somehow. There was seemingly no explanation. The 3 of us, who didn't live in that apartment, were full of fear and excitement. We stayed in that all-night restaurant until the sun came up. No one wanted to force our friend to go back to that place alone. In the end, he stayed with one of the guys, and we agreed once we were all well rested, we would go back and check over his apartment. I woke up later that evening and read a text from one of the guys. We were all going to meet up at that same restaurant at 7 p.m. to figure out our next steps. Once everyone was there, we decided to go check over his apartment. When we got there, the lights were still on, just how we left them. He unlocked his door, and we were in. We were petrified as we crossed the threshold. There were a few rogue strands of hair by the door, but not a great amount. We pushed forward in silence. Hair was everywhere. We saw hair in the bathroom, in the same position it was the other night, plus much more, strewn all over the apartment, in the kitchen, hallway, and living room. No one should have been able to get into his apartment, since that night we were all there. Inwardly, I was asking myself if I was dreaming as we paced around. It didn't feel real, like I wasn't part of reality for a moment. We checked everywhere, and as we looked around, we saw those ownerless strands of dark, wiry hair. Then, he let out something halfway between a sigh and a scream. The atmosphere was unbearable. I was terrified. We asked him what was wrong, but he didn't say a word. He just slowly lifted a finger and pointed it towards the living room. I followed his finger, and it was pointed towards the frosted glass windows to his balcony. There was nothing in the upper half of the frosted glass window, just his clothesline, with a hanger, dancing in the breeze. This can't be what made him speechless, I thought to myself. Then I looked lower, and I saw what he had. There was a shape. A long-haired woman was sat on the floor of his balcony. She was dressed completely in white. The second I saw her, I knew where the hair had come from. This is the horrible thing. I cannot tell you for certain that she wasn't a ghost, or she was a human. All I can tell you is that when I saw her, I experienced intense dread and fear, and I couldn't even see her all that well. Stranger still, no one screamed. We all just stood there, in horror, pleading that the phantom woman did not notice us, yet believing deep down that she did. No, instead of screaming, we just silently backed out of the room and the apartment. After that, our friend stayed with us for different periods of time until he could move out of that place. We had many opportunities to go back to his place and help him collect his things, since he was adamant he wouldn't go alone. I suggested we try and purify the place, so we put a bowl of sake in the corner and a dish of salt in another corner. One time we went back to get some of his things, we noticed that the salt had solidified and the sake had turned a dark color. This may have been due to humidity, or perhaps that mysterious woman. And of course, there was hair. Still, everywhere, in that apartment. My friend moved away, and has no issues to report. We never found out what was going on with that apartment. But I don't think it was a coincidence that a shrine was close by. A long time ago, my dad was seeing another woman behind my mum's back. A few years later, he decided to break it off with his mistress. This caused her to become mentally unstable. My sisters and I would occasionally see her stood on the road near our school, acting strange. She frightened us. My sisters were able to ignore her with ease, but I somehow felt sorry for her. She spoke to me occasionally, and when my sisters weren't there, I would always reply. After a while, she would say things like, "You're such a good girl. You're the best out of your sisters." One day, to my surprise, she gave me a Jenny doll. I was overjoyed. Since I am the youngest of my siblings, I would always get their hand-me-downs. I never had something new, something of my very own. Now this wasn't some old tattered doll, no. This was a brand new Jenny doll, just for me. I didn't want my sisters to get their hands on my new doll and take her for their own. Furthermore, I was sure that they would tell on me and Mum and Dad would take Jenny away. I decided not to tell them about the doll. But because my father's mistress was mentally unstable, she didn't really care what kind of trouble she caused me. She became obsessive. She tried to give me a huge amount of Jenny products. A hair salon, a playhouse, 7 more Jenny dolls. Every day she would be waiting for me on the way to school. It was all too much, and her behavior scared me. So I began to avoid her. I changed my route. After a while, she stopped waiting for me on the way to school, and eventually, I went back to walking my usual route to school again. I was happy, but one morning, I saw her again. I didn't feel the usual kindness she had projected before. Something had changed. She was very calm and still, totally the opposite of how she had been before. Her face was pale, and her smile was now thin. I couldn't really see much of her face, as it was hidden beneath the brim of her big hat and sunglasses. She was carrying 2 huge overnight bags by her side. In one of the bags, a box was poking out, somewhat intentionally. Immediately I recognized the box's shape. I was sure that it was a Jenny doll box. "I have to go away. I'm going far away. Please accept this as a parting gift," she said as she offered the box to me. It was a Jenny doll, one that I hadn't seen before. It was a Jenny with long black hair. I hurried along to school. I was so eager to show everyone my rare new Jenny. Honestly, I couldn't wait to start boasting. Some horrid boy snatched the box from me at school. He tore it open and pulled my new rare Jenny's head off. I was mortified. Some of the girls at school managed to get Jenny back from the boy and they returned her to me. I held her head in my hands, and I saw weed-like clumps of someone's black hair jutting from beneath her chin. It didn't look right. One of the girls who returned the doll pinched a clump of the hair. At first, a huge curled-up wad of hair came out, followed by long, trailing strands. We watched as the hair from Jenny's scalp slowly started to become unraveled. A crowd of children gathered round to get a closer look. Hair from her head was disappearing from the scalp as the girl tugged on the clump of hair. Someone noticed small blood clots attached to the roots of the hair. It was definitely human hair. But this wasn't hair that was cut, but hair that was torn from someone's head. We all stared at the doll Suddenly, we were all screaming in horror. I felt so scared and so bad inside, I was revolted. I began to cry. Others around me were crying too, even the boy who ripped Jenny's head off. We were inconsolable. The teachers had to cancel our following lesson. The teachers called an assembly, and we were all given a serious talk about that incident. We were reminded of the importance of not receiving gifts from strangers, and to be aware of perverts. I was made to state before my teachers and my parents, who were called in from work, I will not take things from strangers, and I will be careful of perverts. Neither my parents nor teachers would say that the pervert was my father's ex-mistress. It was just a word used to distance us all from my father's personal situation. To this day, whenever I see a Jenny doll, I feel sick and frightened, especially the new ones with black hair. This happened when I started living alone. Every home has a light switch, and most of those light switches are the type that when you press them, they make a clicking or snapping kind of noise as they go from on to off, right? They come in all shapes and sizes, but the one I had in my apartment was the standard that you see almost anywhere. Anyway, imagine that switch. It's an interesting story so far, right? Stay with it, it gets better. Well, I was living in an apartment for a while, and with everyday use, things break. The plastic casing around my light switch came away from the wall, leaving only the light switch there and some cables behind it. There wasn't an issue. The light switch was still usable, but the electrical wires were now exposed. It wasn't a great look. I needed to get it fixed before I got a shock or something. So I got the plastic cover and I tried to reattach it to the wall, but it wouldn't sit in place right. I looked at the wall, and entwined between the wires, I saw something twisted up back there. What the hell was that? I wondered as I pulled at it, and then I saw hair emerge from the wall cavity. I pulled, and bundles of thick hair came snaking out of the gap behind the light switch. There was enough to fill a pint glass. Why was there hair in there? I was freaked out, and quite frankly disgusted, but I didn't feel frightened. I was more confused than anything. I threw the hair in a plastic bag, and I threw it in the garbage. I reattached the cover, but it didn't fit back perfectly. It didn't matter. A few days later, the switch caught my eye. I saw hair dangling out of the gaps of the plastic casing. I started pulling it out again. It was about the same amount as last time. It was seriously weird. I couldn't make sense of it, so I went and spoke to the owner of the building. I asked about the former resident. It was a woman. Maybe she had done this, I wondered. Apparently she was a perfectly normal person until one day, when she just simply disappeared. No one had seen or heard from her since that day. After a while, her apartment was opened, and her personal items were retrieved by her family, and eventually, her apartment was sold. The hair kept poking its way through the gap in the light switch housing right until I left that place. I don't know if it still does to this day. I didn't suffer from any sleep paralysis, and I didn't see anything paranormal in that apartment, but the hair, that was unexplainable. I wonder sometimes, what happened in there? This is a true story. A few years ago, I lived in Tokyo with my sister. We started out by renting an apartment, but quickly realized for the same amount of money, we could just live outside the city, in a house. So my sister and I decided to go for it. We found this big, beautiful house and decided to snap it up straight away. We didn't care that we weren't living in the city anymore. One weekend afternoon, my sister and I were in our new house. My sister was taking a bath, and I was watching TV upstairs. I heard a scream coming from the bathroom. It was such a loud scream, I thought, great, my sister's seen a cockroach or some kind of bug. I saw my sister stood there soaking wet in the hallway. She didn't even have a towel. I asked her what happened. I wondered if someone had been trying to peep in at her or something. She said, "In the bath. Go look in the bath, please." There was water everywhere on the floor in the bathroom. That was annoying, but it also meant that something had made her leap out of the bath in shock, and I was curious as to what that was. She went off to get changed while I looked around the bathroom, but I couldn't find anything out of place. I wondered what she was talking about, so I called her back, but she wouldn't go anywhere near the bathroom. Once she was ready, she told me in her own words what had happened in there. She was taking a bath as usual, and she said she heard this raspy breathing in the room with her. She looked around and of course there was no one in there with her. She guessed what she had heard was nothing but the wind. She began to wash her hair, and her mind drifted elsewhere. She was leaning forward to get the conditioner. She put some on her hand and applied it to her hair. Then, something was different. Long hair. My sister had short hair, and the hair she felt was about 10 centimeters longer than her own. So she suddenly jumped out of the bath. She said before she got out of the bath, she felt the back of her head come in contact with someone's lips and nose. Ever since that day, she's always asked me to stand outside the bathroom while she has a bath. It's pretty funny. I haven't had any experiences myself, and I hope that I don't. This happened when I was working in a facility for people with disabilities. The facility had homes on site and staff accommodation too. There was a rota which determined which member of staff would be staying overnight. Since I was new at the time, I wasn't going to be spending the night alone. An older member of staff would be staying overnight with me. I wanted to learn everything I could about the job to be good at it. Back then, I was more naive than I am now. I was eager to please. Eventually, I got used to the rhythm and routine of my work and began to strike up a bond with my co-workers. I heard a story that I didn't really want to hear. Apparently, our facility was haunted. Staff members said that there was a woman in white who appeared only in the men's dormitory, and a woman with long hair who appeared in the facility. I'm really freaked out by anything ghostly. It's not because I'm a believer, it's because I guess I just scare easy. I'm that type of person. When quite a few of the staff members told me about the ghosts that haunted the facility, I began to get really nervous there at night, especially about the men's dormitory. Eventually came the day that I would be working the facility alone at night. There were no male staff members on site, and I felt quite alone. There were only about 8 residents that I needed to take care of, and they all went to their rooms and to bed after 9 p.m. So, from thereafter, it was my job to make the rounds in the dark facility by myself. I remembered the stories that I heard from my co-workers. When you sleep in your bed, you hear the footsteps of someone walking in the hall. Even if the TV is turned off in the dorm, it will instantly turn on after the footsteps are heard. I was really freaked out, and I made sure I did my rounds as quickly as I could. Those dark corners in the facility had me spooked. But as the night shifts passed by, I became increasingly less frightened by the ghost stories I'd heard, and deemed them nothing but rumors. Nothing creepy or strange ever happened. Then came the night when everything changed. It was no different to any other night to begin with. I ate dinner with the residents, cleaned up and helped them bathe, just like any other night shift. After that, I helped them get ready for bed. I wasn't even thinking about the ghost stories I heard anymore. I planned on going to the night duty room and watching some TV on the sofa, taking the night nice and easy. I had worked a fair few consecutive days without rest, so I passed out on the sofa. I woke up from a light sleep to find the room completely pitch black. Who turned off the lights? Who turned the TV off? I wondered in the midst of a panic. We never turned the lights off in the night duty room. I was half asleep. I tried to get up and get into bed, but for some reason, I couldn't move. My whole body was as heavy as lead, and I began to profusely sweat. As I struggled to find out what was happening to me, I noticed something in the corner. My heart started racing when I saw a woman with long, dark hair stood in the corner. The room was dark. I couldn't see her face, and it was hidden behind her hair. I had heard from co-workers that occasionally residents would come to the night duty room. I wondered if this was the case. I wanted to ask if something was wrong, but the words wouldn't come out. The woman seemed to have been looking at me for a while, but when I tried to speak, she just left the room. Before I knew it, it was morning. I didn't even remember going to bed. I had to get up and get to work. At breakfast, I asked some questions to the residents, if anyone came to the night duty room last night, and they all said no. I ended up asking all the residents, and not one of them said that they had come to the night duty room. Some of them thought it was forbidden. Well, in a way it is, but we don't have such a strict rule. The one thing that makes me think that they're all telling the truth is the fact that everyone in this facility has shorter hair than the woman I saw. I don't know if I want to say this, but I think I saw something paranormal that night.